All right. So yeah, my name is Paige Grudzian. I am the community organizer for the Stop Underage Drinking and Drugs Coalition. I am a social worker and a certified prevention specialist. I work in the downriver area in 13 of our districts. My role is primarily working with teenagers, mostly in the high school. So a lot of the students that I work with do identify within the LGBTQIA plus community. I have a lot of family members that identify within the community. So this is something that's really important to me. I've been an ally since I can remember. I think I was raised that way just because, again, when you're raised in a family like that, it's a little bit more ingrained oftentimes. But yeah, as Anita said, please, as we go through, put your questions in the chat. I'm going to ask Destiny or Rain to kind of watch while I'm presenting, because sometimes multitasking is difficult when you're the one speaking, and then I'll do the same for them while they're speaking. So I will let Destiny, and I go by she, her pronouns. I'm sorry, I forgot about that one. And if you need a reminder, you'll see it at the end of my name next to my picture. So Destiny.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Destiny Flowers Fayed. I use she, her pronouns. I am a supports coordinator in the IDD department. I've been there just shy under 4 years. I am a member of the DEI Council, the SOGI Committee, the Health and Wellness Committee, and the Current Events Subcommittee. I think that's all the committees I'm on. There may be more. I identify as queer, pansexual. I kind of alternate depending on the situation. So this training for me is, I'm informing the training through my lived experience and through my time at U of M Dearborn, where I got my undergrad in sociology, psychology, and women and gender studies. I also received the LGBTQ study certificate, have interned at Equality Michigan, and in just a little under a month, I will be receiving my master's degree in clinical rehabilitation counseling, and I hope to inform my practice of that intersectionality between disability and sexuality. Thank you, Rain. It'll be a pleasure working with everyone today.
And I'm Rain Khan. I use she, her pronouns. I'm Assistant Director of Youth Services. My particular areas of interest are in diversity, equity, and inclusion, juvenile justice, evidence-based practice, and trauma, and that kind of intersection of the different identities in our work, and especially in the youth population. And I'm super excited that everybody's here today, and you've got some good experts with Paige and Destiny supporting this training today.
And Rain, don't be modest.
Thanks. Go ahead, Paige.
All right. Yeah, so we're going to break this up. First, we're going to do the 101 for y'all, so you have a base knowledge when we go into the support part of the presentation. Again, if you have questions, don't feel like you have to wait. If it's a question that we're going to touch on later, we'll just let you know that that's something that we're going to get to later on in the presentation, and we can address it then. So, all right. So before we really dive into the meat of the presentation, I always like to remind everybody that we're going to have some training agreements when we go through this. I know there are often a lot of questions that come with the learning process here, and we want to make sure everybody is as respectful as possible. We're going to remember safety over comfort. Some conversations, especially when you're looking at things within the LGBTQIA plus community or diversity in general, they can be kind of uncomfortable. That discomfort doesn't mean that something's wrong. It just means you need to sit with it for a little bit. But also, we want to make sure that we are encouraging everyone to be safe, and we're providing information that allows us to build a community that is safe for everyone. If you disagree, still be respectful. Again, some of this might go against what you're used to or what you've grown up to know. Just be respectful of the individual as we go through.
Pages, are we supposed to be on that slide?
Yeah, did it not go?
No.
Oh no. All right, hang on.
Sorry to interrupt. Okay, there we go. I was just like, just in case she didn't know.
Oh my goodness. All right. Yeah, because all All right, here we go. Yeah, so this is where we are. Sorry about that. But yeah, so everyone is a teacher and a learner. So there are some things that while I am in a position where I'm providing a training, I might be able to learn from you as well. We're constantly learning and adding to our knowledge base. Know that the impact of what you say is more than your intent. So just because you don't mean something to come across that way, someone might interpret it that way, and we need to be able to acknowledge that and know that, you know, we have to be more cautious with the word choices that we use. Use I statements. We're not going to try to speak for an entire group of people when we're discussing like our experiences. So if you've experienced something, make sure that you have identified that it is about you and not roping a bunch of other people into it. No oppression competition. So this one you see more when, oftentimes when we talk about intersectionality, this one comes up where if we're talking about the oppression within one group, another group of people who identify slightly different often will come up and say, oh, well, wasn't that hard. This was harder because of X, Y, and Z. We're not competing. Everyone has had their own experiences and experienced oppression in various ways. So we're going to respect that. Accountability with respect and support. So again, that kind of ropes into all of it. If you make a mistake or you misspeak, that is okay. We're learning, but accept that when someone says, oh, okay, that probably wasn't the best word choice, or tries to correct you, sit with that for a little bit, and we're going to be respectful about that and take ownership of that the best that you can. Individuals are the experts of their own experiences. So again, with those I statements, when people are talking about what they've experienced, we're not going to discount that because that was their experience. All right, did I miss anything, Destiny? Okay.
Does anyone have any questions about those before we move on? One that kind of doesn't make sense that we need to elaborate a little bit more on? No? Okay, perfect.
All right, so we're gonna start with the basics. What exactly does this acronym stand for? So lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, asexual, and plus. So these are general definitions. Sometimes each of these might have sub definitions, and we'll get into that a little bit more, or subcategories that people identify within. But in general, lesbians are typically those who are romantically and or emotionally attracted to other women. So women who are attracted to other women. Gay, anyone experiencing attraction towards someone of the same gender. And this can be used, you know, men who are attracted to other men, women who are attracted to other women, non-binary who are attracted to non-binary, and every other kind of combination in there. So, sorry, the smoke is getting my throat a little agitated, so I apologize if I'm clearing my throat a lot today. Someone who is bisexual experiences attraction to multiple genders, and as you'll see throughout the training, there is a wide array of genders and ways that people identify. This one's also used sometimes interchangeably with pansexual. There's a little bit of a divide on that one. So those who are typically a little bit older, not always, but the older generation often says that bisexual encompasses everything, while some say that it is just those who are more specific to like certain genders, and pansexual will encompass a little bit more. So sometimes interchangeably, sometimes they're a little bit more split. It's kind of split within the community, and it often depends on that age bracket as well, but not always. Transgender is someone who has transitioned from one gender to another. However, when I say that, it does not mean that someone is not that gender until they've transitioned. So I will make that caveat that it means that someone is identifying or wishes to transition or feels like they're living within a body that is not one that they identify with. Queer, this one I will kind of do an asterisk with this one as well. Some within the community do still find this term to be offensive. Again, oftentimes with the older generation, this was used as a slur, but the younger generation has started to take this one back. So if you use it and someone says that they don't like that one, don't fight them on it. It just means that that's something that might have been used in a negative way towards them. But this one denotes someone who has a sexual orientation that is anywhere outside of the established norm. So outside of a heterosexual relationship. So this one is more of an umbrella term that covers many, if not all, of those within the LGBTQIA plus community. Questioning this one is just someone doesn't know. They're unsure of where or how they identify within the spectrum, and they're still trying to figure it out, but they know that they fall somewhere within the LGBTQIA plus community. Intersex is someone who has who may have multiple oh my gosh, that has multiple sex organs. So this was originally referred to, though we don't use the term, we might have heard it as someone who is a hermaphrodite, but now we call them intersexed instead. And then asexual is someone who doesn't experience sexual attraction within a relationship. And that also kind of comes on a spectrum, but it's typically when someone has less focus on that sexual component of a relationship and more on that that emotional connection to someone. And then the plus just means we're still learning. So there might be some other things that we need to add to this acronym, or there's a new term that someone wants to use. So just leave that open if we need it. So while we talk about attraction, there's so many different kinds. Did you need to add something, Destiny? Did I mix?
Oh, well, there's one thing I wanted to add to this, but then also I don't see that slide.
Is it not going?
Yeah. So while you figure that we're having some technology issues, y'all, I'm so sorry. I just also kind of wanted to add that there's no single way to identify as gay, lesbian, transgender. You are the only person who gets to decide what you identify as. You get to decide what that specific label means to you. If describing yourself as that label helps you understand yourself, feel more comfortable with yourself, use it. You also don't have to be 100% sure that you are that label before using it. You can try it on, see how it fits, and take it off anytime you'd like to.
Yeah. Thanks, Destiny. So yeah, attraction types, there's several different ones. This list here is not, again, a exclusive or a final list. There are some other ones in here. These are the main ones that we'll probably talk about and that you'll see come up. So you have sexual attraction. So this one looks at that sexual component. How is someone sexually attracted to someone? What does that interaction look like? You can also have a romantic attraction. So this is how someone desires romantic contact, but this does not involve the sex component of that. So this is looking at just the romantic interaction between two people or multiple people. You have your aesthetic attraction. So this is when you have that physical attraction based on how somebody looks. You like just their general appearance. You have a sensual attraction. So this one looks at interacting with someone in a non-sexual way. So this is when you just really want that hugging or holding hands, that physical contact, but again, that's not sexual. And then you have emotional attraction. So someone can be attracted to the emotional connection that they have with another person. And this can be seen in platonic relationships as well. So this is not just within your typical romantic style relationship. You can see these all over. So you might have an emotional attraction with a family member or with a really close friend. And you said you have something to add, Destiny? No? Okay. All right. So this is a long list of terms to know. We're going to get through it. Again, this is 101. If you have questions, stop me. We're just trying to make sure you have that foundational information going in. So affirm. So this means giving that support, recognition, and encouragement, that validation. So that's if someone comes to you and is saying that they identify somewhere within the LGBTQIA plus community, you're acknowledging it and you're validating that, you know, you still love them, providing that validation and support. Ally, this is a term we've seen a lot across many different topics. So this is not someone who just says, hey, I love people who are within the LGBTQIA plus community. This is someone who, if they hear someone misspeak or make a mistake or say something that is considered rude to someone within the community, that they're going to stand up and they're going to say something. They're going to try to correct the person who misspoke, and they're going to really do the work to try to make sure that their community is a welcoming and safe place. When we talk about cisgender, this is someone who their identity completely aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. So for me, I was assigned female at birth. I still identify as female, so I'm a cisgendered person. Coming out, this is the process that people go through when they decide to disclose to their family and or friends that they identify in some way within the LGBTQIA plus community. This can be done to a large group of people. It can be done to one-on-one, like as they go through their friend group. It doesn't matter. Sometimes someone will come out multiple times. So oftentimes you'll have people who come out within their friend groups and then a second time to their family. And you'll also hear people having to come out again every time they get a new job. That's one that we hear is every time when people move through their careers, they might find themselves having to come out over and over again as they move through their oh my gosh, today my brain is just not working. I apologize. It is Friday. It's early. We're still going. But yeah, as they move within their career, they might end up having to come out multiple times. Discrimination. So this is any unfair treatment towards any group of people based on race, religion, age, sex, disability, or ability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. We have gender. So this is your set of social, physical, psychological, and emotional traits. These are often influenced by the expectations of the society of which we live in. And we'll talk a little bit more about this one too as we go, because often societies will have something that they consider feminine, masculine, androgynous, and it's based within that culture. You have gender expression. So this is how someone chooses to express themselves. So they can do this through clothing, hairstyle, mannerisms, and characteristics. So you can have someone who has a gender expression that is different than the gender that they were assigned at birth or the gender that they choose to, or the gender that they go by on a day-to-day basis. So gender dysphoria, this is the actual diagnosis that goes with someone who has identified as transgender. So this refers to the psychological distress that results from living within a body that does not align with who they are. And not all trans people experience dysphoria, and it varies at different levels depending on the person.
Okay, so the first one we have is gender fluid. It is a term used by people who identify as having a gender that is fluid within that spectrum. They may or may not also identify as transgender. So maybe one day this person is feeling particularly masculine and is identifying, with masculine pronouns and gender one day, but, maybe a different day, their feminine aura is shining through. So it's just something that can move across that spectrum however they feel. Gender identity, that is an individual's inner sense of being male, female, or another gender. It's not necessarily the same thing as sex assigned at birth. Everyone typically has a gender identity. Some folks decide to not subscribe to a gender at all and feel kind of blah about the idea of genders, period. But a lot of us do have a gender identity that we assert that we are. Gender nonconforming is behaviors that do not match, those stereotypes, expectations about what it means to be quote unquote female or male, usually through dress or physical appearance. Gender roles is the social expectations of how someone should look or behave, often based on the sex they were assigned at birth. Gender roles can vary geographically in different countries. The gender roles that we typically assign men and women to follow may look completely different somewhere else. That doesn't make theirs any less wrong than or better than ours. It's just, culturally, what is the norms within the society you're in. Harassment is actions or words that harm or distress a person. They do not otherwise serve a legitimate purpose. This often interferes with the ability to take really advantage of everything: educational opportunities, housing, careers. Hate crimes are crimes that are motivated by personal characteristics such as race, religion, sex, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity. Different states have different definitions of hate crime and what identities are protected under that, but we do have local, federal, and state laws that do exist, and they carry out different penalties. Heterosexual, excuse me, it is Friday. Heterosexism is the assumption that sexuality between people of different sexes is normal, standard, superior, universal, and anything else is kind of inferior, different, or invalid. So a common way that heterosexism is seen is automatically assuming a woman is married to a man after you find out they are married, or a man is automatically married to a woman when you find out that he's married. For example, if you're doing like a client intake and your male client checks off married on that little demographic form, and you go, oh, what's your wife's name? You kind of just assume because they were married that they had a wife, and you asked it in a way that is carrying out heterosexism. Homophobia is a fear or hostility towards folks who have diverse SOGI, often expressed as discrimination, harassment, and violence. Transphobia, it's very similar, but specifically towards folks who are gender nonconforming, transgender, who kind of fall in that umbrella of not subscribing to traditional gender roles that they were assigned at birth.
I did really quick because you mentioned SOGI. When we say SOGI, you're good. We're talking about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. So that's just a shortened acronym for those things that you might hear also throughout your workplace or in the community or throughout this presentation.
So people who have diverse SOGI have always existed. Gender nonconformity is not a new phenomenon or trend. In fact, gender and sexual diversity can be seen throughout histories, like ancient Greece and Egypt. Some examples include the Hijra people of South Asia found in Hindu culture. Those are folks who are typically born into male bodies that follow feminine norms. In different indigenous cultures, you have folks who identify as two-spirit. Those are folks who have male and female spirits, and this is seen as a gift. And I like to include this one because in ancient Egypt, this is a couple that may be the first documented gay couple that we see in history. They were buried together. We have Khenuhotep and Neankenum. And an argument against LGBTQ identities is that it is quote unquote trendy. It's something that is new or a fad, but honestly, I think it's because we now have words for what were previously unnamed identities. It's also important to note that a lot of history is based around Western ideas of gender, so centralized around the United States region and what it means to be male or female.
All right, so we're gonna watch a little clip. So hopefully my tech issues do not pass on to this video about pronouns.
All right, folks, here we go. A romaine and kale salad with avocado, cucumber, shishito peppers, and 4 kinds of cheese. Sprinkled in balsamic straight from Italy.
Wow! In my day, salads only had 2 ingredients. A rock-hard wedge of iceberg lettuce and a stinky old dried-up tomato.
Sorry, guys. I'm gonna have to eat fast. Alex is stopping by in a few minutes to work on our robotics project.
Alex, is that the girl with that weird dog? Or the boy with the hat with the wings that flap?
No, Uncle Jay. This is Alex.
Oh, okay, I remember. A very nice young... come to think of it, well, is Alex a boy or a girl?
Actually, Alex doesn't define themselves as boy or girl.
What else is there?
Back in your day, most people understood the world in terms of just boys and girls. But now, we know gender is more complex than that.
Wait, aren't we just talking about whether you're born with a or a hee?
When you're born, your sex is assigned in a medical way, but the sex listed on your birth certificate may not necessarily match your gender identity.
Gender identity is a person's inner experience of who they are in terms of gender, their deep personal sense of being male, female, a blend of both, or neither.
And while many people have a gender identity that's the same as their assigned birth sex of female or male, that's not always the case, because gender exists on a spectrum. Like transgender, which means a person whose gender identity is not consistent with their assigned birth sex. Non-binary, which means a person whose identity doesn't fall in the category of either male or female. And genderqueer or gender fluid, which means a person who does not identify themselves as having a specific gender at all.
Does gender identity have to do with being straight or gay?
Actually, no. Gender identity has to do with the way you feel about yourself, while sexual orientation is based on the way you feel toward others, the people you may or may not be attracted to.
You know, I really like Alex, and I can tell they're a good friend to you. But I'm still pretty confused about all of this.
That's okay. You don't have to fully understand someone to respect them. To start, try not to make any assumptions about a person's gender, and use the name and pronouns that they ask you to. Above all, be a friend or ally for people of all gender identities.
That's right, Mom. Oh, Alex is here. Come on in.
Hey, everyone.
Oh, hey, Alex. Care for some salad? The balsamic's right from Italy, you know.
So I like that video. I feel like it takes a lot of what we've kind of gone over and put it into like a fun little video that makes it a little bit easier to digest. But yeah, so on the point of not assuming someone's pronouns, we are moving into a space where a lot more people are having their pronouns either on their Zoom calls, they're wearing a pin, their work ID might have their pronouns on them as well. A lot of email signatures have pronouns, but outside of the professional space where you don't have the name tags all the time, it makes it a little bit more difficult. So just try not to assume. Use someone's name if you don't know in a sentence. If you're trying to figure out how to speak about somebody, you can just put their name in the space where you normally would put someone's pronoun instead, just to be respectful until you know. But everybody has pronouns. It would be impossible to not have pronouns. They just look different. And many cultures have historically had a variety of pronouns. This is also not a new thing. So yes. Okay. So with gender identity, this is something that occurs early on in our early development. So around the age of 2, children become conscious of their physical appearance between the physical differences between boys and girls. So it's not uncommon during this period if anyone here has little ones that they've raised or been around a lot, they tend to get really focused on who has what kind of parts. It's not uncommon for them to be, exploring their own parts and pointing out that their parents might have different parts or family members. So they're very aware of the differences. Before their 3rd birthday, most children can easily identify themselves as either a boy or a girl. And then by the age of 4, most children have a pretty good sense of what their gender identity is. But you're going to see during this phase a lot of exploration of that gender role. It doesn't always indicate how the child identifies. So you'll see young boys playing with toys that are stereotypically considered a girl toy, like dolls, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. It just means that at this age, they're exploring what those gender norms and those expectations are. And during this phase, you might see some signs that that the child doesn't identify the way that they were assigned at birth. So you might see it as early as 4, or early, between that 2 and 4 development phase.
Gender roles is my favorite. So gender roles talks about how people are expected to act, speak, dress, groom, and conduct themselves based upon their assigned sex. For example, girls and women are generally expected to dress in typically feminine ways and be polite, accommodating, and nurturing. On the flip side, men are generally expected to be strong and aggressive and bold. And when a woman acts in ways that are typically considered strong, aggressive, and bold, sometimes people get put off by that, and vice versa. If men are acting in ways that are traditionally more caregiving, sometimes society imposes those kind of judgments about, who they are as a person, because they are not acting the way that they quote unquote should be acting. These are rules that are unwritten, and it's very limiting. Boys and girls are socialized at a very young age to act, think, and dress certain ways simply because of the sex they were assigned at birth. It can discourage girls and boys from really investigating and discovering their talents, as they are often subtly discouraged from trying certain things that aren't typically accepted in their gender. For example, if Johnny wanted to try and play the flute, he's really interested in musical instruments. Someone discouraging Johnny from doing that by saying playing the flute is for girls, encouraging him to try soccer instead. So these are kind of the ways that, kids at a very young age can sometimes feel like they can't fully express their interest because of ways that people have treated them before when they wanted to try things out. So they kind of just go along with the status quo of things, not necessarily because they want to, but they're afraid of how people are going to react when they want to really express themselves. So it's very limiting. Gender also applies to objects and actions.
And Destiny, before I get too much into that, I just wanted to add to your last section that when it comes to kids and toys, just because you see a kid playing with a toy that's not typically associated with the gender that they say they are at that age, does not mean that it's indicative of, being trans or having a diverse sexual orientation or gender identity later on. It's just, typical child exploration, and it's not always something that's a clue or a sign. It just could be, that's just how kids are.
Right. So if a boy is playing with the doll, that does not mean they're gonna eventually identify as a girl or that they're gonna eventually identify as gay. Those are just those weird rules we put on things. And a lot of that has to do with historical context and, kind of how gender roles have evolved. So when you kind of put it in perspective about, what we've done before in the past, men used to dress as women in the theater. They used to wear skirts and dresses all across history. And up until the 19th century, all children in Europe were dressed in skirts until they hit teenage years. Women have cross-dressed during war times before they were allowed to enlist. So, these unspoken rules about behavior are shaped by the culture. It's not something that was written into the sky or just came to be out of nowhere. That's why when it's so important to look at history and the context before something, before deciding something is quote unquote abnormal, because something we may consider abnormal now, quote unquote, used to be totally accepted back in the day. The only thing that has changed was how society in general have viewed it. So not saying everything before in the past is okay, because some things were definitely encouraged back then that we discourage now, but try not to be so, looking at the bigger context of things. So when we also think about gender roles, this also applies to objects and actions. I gave that example earlier of Johnny being told that playing the flute is for girls and soccer is something more for boys. We can also see these into, marketing, like advertising tea for men, tea for women, even though it's the same tea, just different flavors. You can see on here that there's a Kleenex box that is specifically targeted for men. It's man size. I didn't know that my nose was woman sized and that I needed a smaller tissue for it. And Q-tips that are being designed for men. It's called a tool. It's for detailing, cleaning, and building like they were on a construction site. So, objects, actions, and locations are also victims of this unnecessary gendering. One time a guy friend of mine told me that it was gay to go to Starbucks without his girlfriend. And another guy I knew liked the pink drink from Starbucks, but he would go to the barista and lie and say it was for his girlfriend when it was really for him because he was embarrassed to order a drink. A really good tasting drink. And then sometimes this is also strategic for marketing purposes. So companies can try to appeal to both men and women. However, the effects can cause stereotypes to be reinforced through the things we buy. So if you look at these baby clothes, the one intended for a girl talks about how she hates her thighs as an infant, when chunky thighs are extremely cute in infants. And then the other one is designed for a boy, quote unquote, and it's saying they're a superhero. And then if we look at the one right next to it, this one is talking about how a boy has big ideas, but then the one right next to it is a girl who likes to smile, even though girls can have big ideas too, and boys can smile. So it's these little ways that they are reinforced. These are just, a few ways that society helps shape different behaviors and expectations for boys and girls, which again is just so limiting, being put in these boxes of how we should act or behave. And if we decide to deviate that just a little bit, we have these labels thrown on us where we're seen as abnormal or different, when again, we're imposing those values on our actions and clothes and wardrobe choices when it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, I like to give the example. So my youngest brother, I have two younger brothers than but my youngest one, he always said when he was younger, he was so jealous that girls got to wear skirts because they could twirl in them. It had nothing to do with his gender expression. All he wanted to do was put on a skirt and twirl around because it's fun and it looked pretty, and he enjoyed that when he was little. It had zero impact on how he identified later on in life. It was just one of those things that as a kid, he's like, I should be able to do this. So he was allowed to do it. Okay. So when we talk about gender affirming care, this is often discussed specifically in relation to those who are transgender. However, that is not actually the case. Anybody can get gender affirming care. So there's just different kinds, and it depends on what the person needs. So it's a broad term that encompasses a range of social, psychological, behavioral, and medical interventions that are designed to support and affirm a person's gender identity. When it conflicts with the gender they were assigned at birth, and affirm a person's gender identity when it conflicts with the gender they were assigned at birth. So one form is puberty blockers. So these prevent puberty from happening at any point. While again, we see this often in the news and the media in relation to transgender, these are often used for young females who just have started having their cycles too early. So if they start going into puberty too early, doctors might decide that they need to use puberty blockers to make sure that that is prolonged until it's at a safer point or a more developmentally appropriate age for that child. You have hormone replacement therapy, or HRT, which is the typical acronym that you'll see for this. So this can reduce the amount of non-desired hormones that are within your body. This, you can see, it is a little bit different from hormone therapy, which is after where you're going actually, it's the same. Hormone therapy, I think hormone replacement therapy is a form of hormone therapy. Sorry about that. So you'll see this with people who are going through fertility treatments. If someone is low on a certain hormone that they need to be able to conceive, they're going to go through a therapy like this. Sometimes you'll have people that are experiencing, I feel I've seen it with people who grow a lot of facial hair, like women who have a lot of facial hair. Sometimes it has to do with the amount of progesterone, which is considered the male hormone that results in hair growing on someone's face. They might need to use some hormone therapy to try to reduce that and increase estrogen. There's a lot of different uses for this, but it is not just for people who are transgender. Binders. So this is a garment that someone might use to flatten their chest. It is often used within the transgender community, however, not always. So it's kind of like a corset, but for someone's chest instead. You have voice modulation therapy. This one is to adjust speech patterns and tone. This is used, again, for all sorts of reasons. A lot of young kids end up having speech impairments that they might need to go through some sort of voice modulation therapy for. But within the transgender community, it's often used so that someone can train their voice to sound more in a line with what is considered to be appropriate for the gender that they identify as. Hair loss prevention. This is also gender affirming care. So things like Rogaine that were really big. I don't know if it's still promoted the way that it used to be, but for hair loss. You have breast augmentation, also considered gender affirming care. This is used for people who need to have a breast reduction for medical reasons or just really uncomfortable, or anyone who just chooses to change the size of their breast, or sometimes you'll have certain medical diagnoses where men who are men assigned at birth end up having too much breast tissue, and they have to go in and they end up wanting to go in and have that removed because it just makes them feel more comfortable. Someone who's gone through breast cancer might need to have breast augmentation to have some of the tissue replaced that they had to have had removed, and then laser hair removal. So, I mean, there's a lot of people use this just to remove hair from unwanted areas on your arms, your legs, armpits, face. While this is used for people within the transgender community, a lot of the population does seek out these services. So it's really important to remember that while we're having these discussions on a grander scale, and all of these discussions are happening in the media, the gender affirming care covers a wide array of services for a lot of different people. It is not just for those who identify as transgender. So just to give you all an idea of what is going on across our nation in terms of what people who identify with a diverse SOGI are going through, Gleason put out a 2021 school climate data survey. So they surveyed youth across the entire nation about their experiences. Sorry. So based on that survey, 81.8% of students reported feeling unsafe in school because of at least one of their actual or perceived personal characteristics. 68% of LGBTQ plus students feel unsafe at school because of their SOGI characteristics. The LGBTQ students, or 50.6% of LGBTQ plus students felt unsafe because of their sexual orientation at school. 43.2% of LGBTQ plus students felt unsafe because of their gender expression, and 40.3% because of their gender. 76% experienced in-person verbal harassment, specifically based on sexual orientation, gender expression, and gender at some point in the year. I can tell you, as someone who is in schools Monday through Friday during the school year, you hear this a lot, and it is not coming just from students towards other students. 31.2% were physically harassed in the past year based on their sexual orientation, gender expression, or gender. Again, this is one that people are like, this isn't really happening. I had a student who had to move schools because he was physically attacked in the bathroom just for being gay. He ended up having his face smashed into a sink and his head shoved in a toilet. This is happening. 12.5% were physically assaulted, punched, kicked, injured with weapons based on their sexual orientation, gender expression. And 53.7% of LGBTQ plus students were sexually harassed, such as unwanted touching or sexual remarks in the past year at school. (61.5% of LGBTQ plus students who were harassed or assaulted in school did not report the incident to school staff. 60.3% of the students who did report the incident said that staff did nothing or told the student to ignore it. 58% of students reported hearing homophobic remarks from their teachers or other school staff. And this is something that I have heard from students and school staff. 72% of students reported hearing negative remarks about gender expression from teachers or other school staff. And 8.8%, which is less than 1/10 of LGBTQ plus students, reported that school staff intervened most of the time or always when overhearing negative remarks about gender expression. So that means most of the time when these negative comments are being made, school staff is just doing nothing. They're just standing there and letting it happen.
Faith, do they know what to say, the teachers? Have they been trained, or are they being trained on how to approach these students?
Unfortunately, no. School districts are terrified to touch the topic because it falls too close to sexual education. And I find that many of our districts think they just don't want to deal with it. They don't know how. There's a lot of pushback. When we've tried to do things in our community that would focus on bringing some light to some of the issues that we're seeing or celebrate diverse SOGI, there's a lot of pushback. There are just violent remarks made from people within the community. There's threats made. It's still a very difficult topic for us to try to approach with our schools, though we're trying. I try all the time. When I go in my schools, one thing that I do to try to help just a little bit outside of just being an ally when I'm there, and if I'm hearing something, I speak up about it. But I wear a rainbow lanyard everywhere I go, and it has little pins on it. We just got these for SOGI that says you are safe with me. I have a pronoun pin that I wear within my schools, just to try to give students a safe place to go. And I have had some teachers and counselors come up and ask me how to deal with different situations, because they know that is, they know that I'm someone that they can ask about that. But unfortunately, we just haven't been able that we'd like to do.
I kind of also wanted to add to that, not all of it is necessarily because a teacher does not quote unquote agree with LGBTQ identities. I think some of it has to be, also related to the political and social climate, especially, depending state by states, depending on what you choose to add to your curriculum. If it's anything that is considering, talking about a sexual orientation, even except a straight one. I notice no one complains about a heterosexual sexual orientation, but sometimes teachers may feel that they're going to get legal repercussions because of what they decide to add to their curriculum, or pushback from parents. So it's not necessarily always because maybe a lack of training, or because they personally aren't interested in being affirming or an ally. It also has to do with the legal and political climate as well, and kind of tying their hands, unfortunately.
The parents and the individuals that are oppressive towards this group of people are often the loudest. I don't actually think they're in the majority downriver. I really don't. Maybe that's wishful thinking, but I just think they're louder. They're louder, and when the threats start, it's really hard to not take it seriously, especially when you have kids involved. You don't want anyone to get hurt. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers your question.
It's just ironic because the things that they're doing to quote unquote prevent their kid from getting hurt actually probably ends up hurting them more. But it, just that, irony that I think we don't always think about too. But to kind of finishing this off, we wanted to make sure we talk about intersectionality. This is a term that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a civil rights attorney, advocate, and Black woman. So this is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique lived experiences, being members of different communities, and having personal qualities that make up who they are. On the right, we have just a few. And what this picture kind of illustrates is, as you see, they are not 5 circles that are completely independent from each other. As you see, they're all touching each other in some way and kind of overlapping and blending and making new colors to kind of show that these identities are not separate, but they are linked together. So having the identity of being LGBTQ and white may have a different experience if you identified as LGBTQ and a person of color, or your disability status and the intersection with disability status and gender identity may create a unique experience that a able-bodied LGBTQ person does not have to go through. So these all kind of work together to form unique experiences. So when we think about identities, we should never be completely separating an identity from the person. We have to look at it all together to really know how this person is experiencing life, because you know, just as I am a woman, I am also queer, and I am not less woman than I am queer, and I am not less queer than I am woman. So I want people to look at me with those terms, and that I'm white, and that I'm able-bodied, and you know, those experiences together all have formed my outlook in the experiences that I have had to face. So unfortunately, some of those identities we talk about are more privileged in society over others. And that privilege that some identities face can cause some benefits that may positively impact their experience on things. I want to remind everyone about that oppression competition thing, whereas, you know, this is, if your experience has been a little bit different, these are kind of just general trends that we see, and maybe a different identity was contributing to your oppression, like classism is one that we don't think about a lot, that may have influenced that negative experience you had. So these all give us different advantages and disadvantages in society. Other ones that I didn't talk about that I think are also important is socioeconomic status, country of origin, ethnicity, size, your disability status, neurodiversity, your religion. These all kind of work together to give us advantages, disadvantages, and our own unique experiences.
All right, so that was just our overview, our little 101 before we dive into how to support your LGBTQIA+ youth. I did want to put this up here as well. I'll leave this up. I think we're going to take a little break before we go into the next one, about a 5-minute break, so everybody can stretch their legs, get a sip of water, make some tea, use the restroom, any of those things. But I'll leave the contact information up here. These are the email addresses that you'll use for anyone who is outside of the Guidance Center agency. For anyone who is internal with the agency, you can also use our SOGI email list. Yeah, any questions before we take a break?
Paige, I did have a question that came through my cell phone from one of my grandparents.
Okay.
They have a grandson that is very enthralled in the new commercial that has come out on the drag queens. And I don't know if you've seen that commercial or not, male figures dressing up as women. And she wants to know if that is appropriate for her to let him continue to watch that, because he's 10 years old and he's very enthralled in that.
I mean, I would say yes. I know there's a lot of controversy around drag queens right now. It is a profession. It is something that people do to own their SOGI. It's got a lot of intersectionality all on its own, but it is not a dangerous thing. So I don't think there's an age that is inappropriate for a child to see a drag queen. Developmentally, it doesn't do any damage. The crime stats, like, there are not drag queens that are hurting children or people. The data is just not there. The data doesn't support some of what's being said about the drag community. But no, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think having a discussion with him around, you know, what is a drag queen? What does it mean? We didn't really go into drag during our presentation, but if that's something that we can come speak, like, we can have a meeting with her, with your grandparents, and we go over that a little bit more. If that's something that she would like, that's not a problem. No, it's fine. Just making sure you're having those healthy conversations about who they are, what they are, that it's just like any other, it's just a job. It's something that people do for a living. It's something they do for fun. I don't know. Go ahead, Destiny.
So in our next training, we do include behaviors that harm and behaviors that hurt. So we will kind of give more tips about that. But just as we were saying earlier, that a boy wanting to play the flute doesn't make them transgender or gay. Showing an interest in drag queens will not. That one thing will not affect their sexuality or their gender identity. What it may do is having those conversations with your grandchild can show that you are a supportive person, and they may feel more safe and comfortable to explore around you. So they might feel more empowered to explore, what gender means to them. But that's, they would probably be doing that anyways, but not with you because, if the, by identifying, those comments, you would be shown as an ally. So kids are going to want to do that exploration anyways, but if they don't think that their caregiver is going to be supportive of it, that's something they're going to hide from them. But if they do think their caregiver is supportive of it, that's something they'll show you. So I think that would cause a lot of beautiful exploration and, a bond that you can have with your grandchild.
There's especially during the month of June, a lot of libraries will have like a pride section for kids. And there's some really good kids books that talk about things like drag. Like there's a RuPaul book, who's probably one of the most famous drag queens, that's just called RuPaul. But there's also books called If You're a Drag Queen and You Know It, It Feels Good to Be Yourself. And there's a couple others that you could look at your local library and see kind of what they have that would be age appropriate, just for curiosity and exploration.
And what I'll do is I'll put it in the chat, and I can also send it to Anita. I have a massive reading list that I put together for different age groups, including adults, and it includes fiction, nonfiction. And then the last page of the document is all children's books, and it has the age ranges. So for a 10-year-old, there might be some that's in the young adult or the YA section of the reading list. It just kind of depends on, which book it is. But I'll put that in the chat, and then, like I said, I'll email it out. So if anybody wants that as a great place to start, they can do that. Because some people, I would recommend, if you're not sure how to have those conversations, I think it's a great step that you're here. So thank you for coming. That's amazing. 2, doing some research on your own, trying to read some of the literature that's out there, watching documentaries. If you have access to HBO, I highly recommend watching the show We're Here. It looks at the drag experience, if that's something specifically that you're engaged in. It has 3 drag queens that go to communities that are not accepting of drag, and they share their story and why it's so important for them and what it means. So it gives a lot of insight into what it is and what it isn't. So that's just my suggestion, but yeah, I'll pop that in. Any other questions?
I appreciate that. She's asking on my phone because she doesn't want to put it in the chat.
That's totally fine. However, everybody's comfortable. And you can direct message us if it's not something you want to put. If you have questions and don't want to put it in the public chat, feel free to direct message myself, Destiny, or Amreen, and we will not share your name. It's okay. I understand.
So I think we're going to take a few minutes break, potty break, and hopefully everybody that's here will come back and enjoy the second segment. I'm very excited about this segment myself because I do work with grandparents and other parents that are very interested on not knowing how to accept this and also how to support their children as well. So we're going to take a 5-minute break, and thank you for coming, and go get a drink of water. Welcome back to our Talk, Listen, Connect educational series for our parents and caregivers. We are going into our second segment now, and we're really excited to hear what Marie and Destiny and Paige are going to share with us the second segment. So Marie, I'm going to introduce you, and please take the reins.
Okay, so I'm Maureen, and my pronouns are she, her. In case you missed introductions earlier, I'll let Paige and Destiny quickly introduce themselves as well, and we can get started.
I am Paige Grudzian, she, her.
Destiny Flowers Fayed, she, her.
So the reason that we wanted to talk about the role that caregivers have is because caregivers are so crucial to the outcomes of their children. We want to understand the struggles that youth with diverse SOGI have in different contexts. And when we say diverse SOGI, just as a reminder, sometimes the term SOGI and LGBTQ+ are used kind of interchangeably. So we talked earlier about how LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer, and the plus has a lot of other identities associated with it as well, that can also be, you know, encompassed in the queer term also. And then SOGI is the sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. One of the reasons that we use the term SOGI sometimes instead of LGBTQ is because everybody has SOGI. So everybody has a sexual orientation, everybody has a gender identity, and everybody has an expression. So like my gender identity is a female, and I use she, her pronouns. And the way that I express my gender is through, you know, I'm wearing earrings, I have longer hair, and I do some of the other, you know, characteristics that are typically associated with a more feminine expression. So we also want to talk about the behaviors that increase risk and behaviors that decrease the risks of trauma and harm, understanding some of the trends that exist with youth who are LGBTQ+ and how race plays a role. And when I say trends, I don't mean it's trendy to be LGBTQ+. I mean that there are certain patterns that exist within the community and the way that, you know, society and politics has a role. There are life outcomes that are associated with rejection and trauma. We want to be able to identify strengths and factors that promote resilience and limit trauma, and understanding the importance of gender affirming care. We want to learn about coming out support and combating ACEs, and how parents and caregivers are allies. I realize that there's a lot of acronyms here, so hopefully I will get to addressing all of those acronyms. But if I don't, please stop me. And I don't mind if people come off mute to ask a question, you know, whatever makes you feel comfortable. I like to be pretty informal. These are the safety agreements that we talked about earlier. I'm not going to go over them again, but just wanted to include them just as kind of a guide for the way that we talk about some of the sensitive issues and kind of the way that we agree to, you know, be conscientious and respectful of everybody. So one of the acronyms I used earlier is ACEs. So ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. The biggest ACEs study was one that was done by Kaiser Permanente from 1995 and 1997 with 2 different waves of data collection. This involved 17,000 people. There was physical exams, there was emotional interviews, there was you know, surveys, there was all sorts of kinds of different ways to assess and compartmentalize the experiences that people had. So what they found was a relationship between these 10 factors that include child physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, having a mentally ill, depressed, or suicidal person in the home, having a drug addicted or alcoholic family member, witnessing domestic violence against the mother. And this should have an asterisk by it because while it's typically the mother, it can be anybody in the home. The loss of a parent to death or abandonment by parental divorce, or a child being removed from home, like going into a residential facility or a group home, or incarceration of a family member for a crime. So what we found is that that original study that kind of defined the ACEs, while it was very large and widespread, it did not include the most diverse group of participants. So the Philadelphia study a few years ago kind of expanded this definition of ACEs and looked at some community level adversities that include behaviors and conditions that include a more diverse group and that are more widespread. So this would include witnessing violence, feeling discrimination, having an adverse neighborhood experience where you don't feel safe being outside, you can't walk home from school in a safe way, being bullied, and living in foster care. So we look at vulnerable populations within an ACEs context. So when talking about youth who are LGBTQ, we know that they are more likely to experience homelessness, experience human trafficking, be fired or not hired based on their identity, be in the foster care system, attempt suicide, and be bullied. So thinking about ACEs, if you look at some of these conditions, you'll see that not only can these be, traumatic, but they're also associated with negative life outcomes. So youth with diverse SOGI are twice as likely to end up in juvenile detention, even though their offenses are likely to be more minor and nonviolent, including school truancy, running away, and probation violations. We would also call them status offenses, or you could call them, you could look at them in terms of something that if you were an adult, you would not be getting in trouble for this. But because you are a child, it's considered breaking the law. 43% of LGBTQ plus youth report being forced out of their home at some point because of their SOGI status. And in one study, 100% of LGBTQ plus youth reported while being in a foster care or group home setting. So bias-related stresses experienced by LGBTQ plus risk put them at an overall greater risk for suicide, mental health problems, substance use, and physical health problems. Just as a small statistic to highlight here, 19% of youth in child welfare identify as LGBTQ plus, which also could be contributing to the rates of abuse and neglect for this specific population, where only 3 to 8% of youth in the US population identify as LGBTQ plus. So this just kind of highlights the overrepresentation in child welfare and being victims of child abuse and neglect. So what we know about these ACEs is when you experience them, it contributes to some of these lifelong factors. So, starting from birth, there's generational and historical trauma that often occurs in populations that have been disenfranchised over time, growing up in social conditions that are harmful, experiencing ACEs, which then disrupts neurodevelopment, going on to disrupt social, emotional, and cognitive development, adoption of health risk behavior. So risky behaviors increase. Also, the conditions that happen because of identities occur, which is then associated with disease, disability, social problems, and early death. Destiny talked about intersectionality earlier. And so when talking about the LGBTQ plus population, it's hard to talk about one population without including the different dimensions of race. So she's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so a recent survey about the challenges experienced by LGBTQ plus youth in the US uncovered that LGBTQ youth of color report experiencing more challenges because of racism. 4 in 5 report experiencing racism, and only 11% believe that their racial ethnic group is viewed positively in the US. Racism and white privilege exist within the LGBTQ community. And again, race and ethnicity are separate identities from SOGI. So some communities view being LGBTQ as a white people thing, This can cause shame and stigma for LGBTQ plus people of color and reduce help-seeking behaviors. This can have risk on both physical and mental health. For example, gay and bisexual African American and Latinx men are at risk of contracting HIV. Risk of contacting HIV because of gaps in accessing a preventative medication called PrEP. This is also partially attributed to how masculinity is defined and performed within these communities. And in some communities, being gay and also a man sometimes become in conflict. This is why an intersectional component is so important, because you cannot separate or single out one specific identity, because they all work together to create a unique experience for the person. LGBTQ race and trauma. Some quotes we see in here is LGBTQ lives remain under threat and gun violence continues to be an ever-present nightmare, whether it is in school children and Uvalde, is that how you, Black grocery, Black grocery store shoppers in Buffalo, intimate partner violence or transgender violence. Gun violence can and does touch everyone's lives, particularly the most marginalized, as Black trans women continue to face an epidemic of violence, as almost 30 hate crimes involving a gun occur a day, as children continue to feel unsafe in their schools. It is more urgent than ever that concrete steps be taken to end gun violence and ensure the safety of all people, including the LGBTQ community. I wanted to highlight that they did mention Black trans women. Black trans women have a higher murder rate. They are, it's really sad to say that, they are murdered in the streets at a rate that is higher than other intersectional dynamics of being LGBTQ. For LGBTQ youth of color, however, a multiple minority status can lead to particular psychosocial vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities are noted in family and social life and may occur in both online and in-person settings. Sexual minority youth of color are at an increased risk of relationships with adult individuals, substance use, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts and trauma. It is important for clinicians to be aware of the intersectionality of LGBTQ status and racial ethnic identity, as this may yield to increased risk of psychosocial stressors and comorbidities. Racism within the LGBTQ communities can also be seen with media. For example, I am more likely to see a LGBTQ person of color portrayed in urban settings in the TV shows I watch, while gay white men are usually written in stories living in rich and affluent neighborhoods. This helps perpetuate stereotypes. I do see we have a question in the chat. What is being done to recruit and train more LGBTQ safe caregivers and home placements? I mean, did anyone have anything they wanted to add on that?
No, but I'm happy to talk about that question a little bit. The question again is, what is being done to recruit and train more LGBTQ plus safe caregivers and home placements? So there's actually been a little bit of movement in the world of DHHS, who is responsible for child welfare, where they are doing more trainings as far as being more trauma informed, more informed of SOGI identities, and more informed about, ways to be supportive. But there's still, as you saw in those statistics, a huge number, of kids that are being harmed. We have a lot of local resources. We're kind of lucky in this area. Like Ruth Ellis, they actually have drop-in centers, and they have a physical residence for shelter and for like long-term residence for young people. So there are, places that exist to support it, but probably not in the numbers that we need it to be. So there is work being done, but it will never be done, while we're still talking about it.
Next slide, please. Okay, wait, here we go. So societal discrimination. So the LGBTQ plus community has survived other identity-based oppression, like anti-sodomy laws, anti-gay marriage laws, lack of support for trans civil and human rights, absence of LGBTQ employee protections, prevention of gender-affirming care, reinforcing stereotypes that LGBTQ folk are predators, groomers, bullying, physical assault, next of kin denial for same-sex relationships. This week, we also celebrated the anniversary of the Stonewall uprisings in 1969, which led the way to the annual Pride marches we see today. Stonewall occurred as a response to police raids that were specifically targeted to LGBTQ plus people. And because the Guidance Center is a mental health organization, I also wanted to add that discrimination has also occurred in how my goodness, it's been a day, how homosexuality used to be classified as a mental disorder until 1973. In the context of time, for some folks, that may seem like a long time ago, but when you kind of look at in that context, it's not still, it's still fairly recent in the whole span of things.
So, and just as to kind of explain a little bit about what next of kin denial is, that would be until we had gay marriage. If you had a long-term partnership and one partner was in the hospital, the other partner couldn't make medical decisions for them the way that a married man and woman would for each other. Or if they were to adopt a child, they wouldn't have the same rights as a heterosexual couple that adopted a child. I know this is especially true for lesbian women, where if one woman births a child, they weren't, up until recently, they weren't able to put the other mother on the birth certificate. So those are the kind of issues we talk about with societal discrimination and next of kin denial.
Or survivor death benefits.
Yes.
When we think about, marriage in general, at first we kind of just go, oh, marriage is this, thing we do when you love someone, but there's actually a lot of legal privileges and benefits that you were afforded when you were married to someone versus in a relationship with them. So a argument used to be, oh, well, gay people can date each other. They're in love with that person. Why can't they just stay together and date? It's because they were denied legal rights and privileges that married heterosexual folks were benefited that they were denied. So when we think about marriage, we also have to think about like the legal benefits of being married versus just in a partnership. Conversion therapy is specifically in quotations because it's not a therapy, but people call it that. According to the Human Rights Campaign, conversion therapy, sometimes known as reparative therapy, is a range of dangerous and discredited practices that falsely claim to change a person's sexual orientation or gender identity or their expression. So many reputable organizations, including the American Counseling Association, American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, they all have released statements that do not support the use of reparative therapy.
It's also illegal and doesn't work.
Does not work. The decision to subject a child to conversion practices can never truly be in conformity with the child's best interest. So if you think that someone thinks that this is something that their child needs and that it will help them, it does not. Parents must make decisions for their children under the premise of informed consent. So this entails knowing what the true nature of the practices are, its inability to actually achieve conversion, and the mounting evidence towards its long-term physical and psychological harm. So when you look at some of the websites that advertise conversion therapy, The way they advertise these websites are supposed to be, you know, they design it in a way that looks really friendly and welcoming, and this, you know, the way they portray it online on their websites, you know, using outdated studies that have been refuted as not a valid study, kind of cherry picking information to suit that argument. This can cause a lot of confusion for parents who maybe in that moment are just very thrown at the news they're given, and they go to these websites looking for some advice and are kind of misled that way. Conversion therapy is cruel, inhumane, and can include a variety of methods that cause guilt and shame. I've seen videos of a survivor of conversion therapy being forced to walk around with a backpack full of rocks so she can physically feel the pressure and weight of her decision, quote unquote, to be gay. Another extreme example of conversion therapy also includes corrective, quote unquote, rape with a person of the opposite sex. And even when you think about, you know, the term reparative therapy, the word itself implies that you are broken and need to be fixed. See here. Let's see, family rejection and mental health. Parents and caregivers often believe that the best way to help their children with diverse SOGI is to help them fit into a world of straight and cisgender peers. What they don't realize is that the child processes this as a rejection of their humanity and their identity. Many gay and transgender children feel like they have to hide who they are to avoid being rejected or upsetting their parents. This affects the youth's sense of self-worth and acceptance. Being devalued at home, school, community, wherever, contributes to the youth devaluing and not caring about themselves. In turn, this can cause an increase in risky behaviors. Would you mind going back? Sorry. Risky behaviors in their plan or in their ability to plan for the future. Parental rejection results in children experiencing hopelessness and general feelings of being alone and unwanted. And then with this statistic, this is referring to, so you're looking at gay and trans young adults, some who weren't rejected and some who were rejected. So for the folks who experienced rejection as opposed to acceptance, they were 8 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 6 times as likely to report high levels of depression, 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, 3 times as likely to be at high risk of HIV and STIs. So family rejection, separation, and abandonment can contribute to ACEs and to the trauma. So as we see here, being LGBTQ does not inherently cause you to be suicidal, depressed, engaging in those risky behaviors that may contribute to drug use, illegal behaviors that can cause harm. It's the, you know, the most important determination with that is experiencing acceptance. So just accepting can cause, you know, your child to be less likely to have experienced those risk factors. And then I know we changed the slides a little bit for this one was mine too, right? Okay, sorry. So family behaviors that increase LGBTQ plus child risk, verbal harassment or name calling related to identity, excluding youth from family activities, blocking access to friends, events, and resources that are seen as LGBTQ, hitting, slapping, or physically harming your child because of their identity, blaming your child when they are discriminated against because of their identity. So it's their fault they're being bullied, not the person who bullied's fault. Pressuring your child to be more or less masculine or feminine. So if they are assigned male at birth, pressuring them to be more masculine and less feminine, and vice versa if you were assigned female at birth. Telling your child that God will punish them for their identity, telling your child that they are shameful or that they shame the family, making your child keep their LGBTQ identity a secret and not letting them talk about it, and responding with disgust regarding identity. So these kinds of behaviors contribute to these statistics again, that the child may be more than 8 times as likely to have attempted suicide, 6 times as likely to have high levels of depression, more than 3 times as likely to use illegal drugs, and 3 times as likely to be at high risk for HIV and STDs.
So there's a lot of responses that are typical when you learn of your child's identity, and they're all, to be expected, and they're all legitimate feelings. So, it's understandable why somebody might feel disappointed, might have concern that it will affect your relationship, be worried that they won't be able to have a typical family, unsure about if they somehow encouraged or caused the identity, worried that they'll be discriminated against, targeted, or just have a harder life in general. Concerns that they don't want to see them struggle at all. As a parent and caregiver, you don't want to see your kids suffer, and knowing that they have an identity that puts them at higher risk. That's sometimes difficult and concerning. So uncertainty about what kind of adversity your child may face. And then confirmation of what you were thinking could be a typical response, and acceptance can be a response as well. This is just a little video, if I can get it to play.
I'll start.
Sound okay?
What did you think?
What did you think?
What did you think? What did you think? What did you think when I told you I was gay?
Well, you kidding?
I didn't think anything because I knew it, and I just needed you to tell me.
I felt relieved. I wasn't like dumbfounded, shocked, and surprised.
Did you have any fears after I told you I was gay?
Yes. Well, not fears of you, just fears for you, about people accepting you outside of your house.
I think society has progressed an awful lot, but naturally, I have fears for you for being a victim of discrimination.
Were you scared to tell me you were gay?
I was petrified. I had known I was going to be in the city for 2 nights, and I had plans if you guys didn't want me to stay in the house with you anymore.
I can't believe you felt that way.
When did you first know I was gay, if ever? Remember, my favorite Power Ranger was the pink.
When did you first know I was gay?
You were like 4 years old with a sheet wrapped around you saying, "Oh, it's Daryl." I mean,
There was times in life that I thought you were, especially when you would walk around the house singing show tunes.
I had conversations with people who were involved in the gay and bisexual community really early on when you were little.
and at that moment, I said to myself, "Oh shit, he's gay,"
And said, "Oh, you know what?
That kid's gay?
That kid's gay."
Wow.
Was I one of the first or the last people you told, and what?
I guess you were kind of both, because I kind of came out all at once.
If you could set me up with one celebrity, who would it be and why?
Whoa.
What about like Brad Pitt and Thelma and Louise?
Oh, I don't like Brad Pitt.
That's why I'm gay and you're not.
You are such a unique, great guy. You are gonna find the right person for yourself when you're not looking. And I don't give a shit about whether it's a celebrity or whether it's some guy who sweeps the streets. So I really can't find a good answer for that question.
Do you have any advice out there for dads who think their son might be gay?
Yes. Open up, ask them, talk to them, be honest, and let them know that you support them and love them no matter who they are.
It has nothing to do with them being gay. Pay attention to your kids.
You want the best for your child. You want to encourage them to be who they are. So if that's who they are, that's who they are. I mean, it's kind of simple.
Oh, happy Father's Day, Dad.
Thanks, sweetie.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Father's Day, Dad.
That must be what did you get me?
Very good.
I should have given a warning about there was some, language in there that, may not be comfortable for everybody. But I believe that this video was, kind of like documenting, honest conversations. And so words like that do come up, but, apologies for language if it's offensive, to anybody. But we talked a lot about some of the risk factors, the trauma, the life circumstances that can arise. But the good news is there is a lot of potential and family behaviors that promote well-being and reduce risk. So having a kid who has diverse sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression does not necessarily mean that they are going to, have some of these more challenging life outcomes, because there's so much potential for you to affect their support and acceptance. And kids that do have that have much better life outcomes that, is more on par with their peers. So things that you can do that are helpful and reduce risk are talking about their identity with them, hearing their words, expressing affection when your child talks about their identity. It's okay to acknowledge discomfort, and you can still be supportive and fully understanding, even if you don't necessarily get it or understand everything or every component. Advocate for your child if they're mistreated. Having a caregiver or having someone in their corner can be really meaningful to a kid who feels that they have been mistreated or has experienced some sort of discrimination, and knowing that they've got one advocate can make a huge difference. Require other family members to respect your child, including using their pronouns. Bring your child to LGBTQ plus events or organizations. So that would be like, pride events or support groups, or, sometimes there's community events through Ruth Ellis. Like I went to a resource fair the other day through Ruth Ellis. Affirmations has some community events as well. Connect your child with an LGBTQ plus mentor or role model so they can see a future for themselves. Welcome LGBTQ plus friends and partners into your home. Support your child's gender expression inside and outside of the house. So this would be clothes, makeup, activities of interest. Believe your child can have a happy life as an adult and convey this message to them. And talk with your faith community about how they support the LGBTQ plus community. If anybody is interested, there is a way where you can look up churches to find out, so that you can find a church that's open and affirming. And to be able to get that label, churches have to go through a process to learn, understand, and show that they've made, actions within their church community and their faith community to be supportive and affirming. And so there is a way you can look up churches if you want to. Other family behaviors is reminding your child that you love them unconditionally and you are proud of who they are. Know and use the pronouns, both in person and referencing them when they're not present. Use your child's chosen name, whether they are present or not. Don't out your child, let them disclose their identity on their own terms. Sometimes there's safety risks associated with outing somebody without their consent. Give grace and be patient with identity exploration. It's typical for youth's identity description and labels to shift as they learn more about who they are and learn more about what terms might resonate with them. So don't be surprised if, you have a kid who, as they, grow and develop, they might use different terms to describe themselves as they find out like what really feels good to them. Don't engage in conversion therapy. It's ineffective and abusive. Your child does not need to be fixed. They are already worthy of love, just how they are. Be patient with yourself, and no mistakes happen when trying to understand your child. If it occurs, apologize and be committed to doing better the next time. an example of this is, when using chosen names, I often think about it kind of like when you have someone that gets married and they change their last name and you keep referring to them as their maiden name, and then you kind of just get used to it and you apologize. Oh, sorry, I forgot, you go by this now, and then you correct it and you get used to it. Connect your child with community groups and resources. There's a list here. There's also a list at the end of the presentation, but some of the local ones are Ruth Ellis Center, Affirmations Detroit, which is in Ferndale, LGBT Detroit, Human Rights Campaign, the Trevor Project. A lot of these you can find online. Affirmations has a lot of support groups online too.
Can I add something real quick, Emery?
Sure, yeah, me too.
So when we talk about outing someone, I just want to give an example. So I have a lot of students that identify as trans within the school districts that I work in. However, they will tell me who I can and cannot use certain names and pronouns with. It's okay to ask who they're comfortable with doing that. So if you use the wrong pronoun that in front of someone who is not considered one of the people that they want to know, that's an example of how you would out them without their consent. So just to give you an example, if you use the wrong name, what I often do is in groups with teenagers or anyone really, when we do introductions, I give the option to use preferred name or nickname, because sometimes even just referring to it as a preferred name
makes it seem like it's optional.
Yeah, so I try to give a lot of options as far as how they want to share what name or pronouns they would want to use. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and then the thing I wanted to add from the last slide is a common response parents may tell their child, which it's well intended, but may not be received well by the child, is I love you in spite of, basically kind of some I love you in spite of you being gay. That's why I really liked that sentence that says, your child is already worthy of love just as they are. So when you convey your acceptance of your child, I would just refrain from language that makes it seem like, despite who you are and despite this fact about you, I'm still choosing to love you, as difficult as that may be for me, because it makes it seem like you're kind of putting a burden on the parents and you're kind of making it now about you when it's about your child in that moment.
Yep, so there's a lot of different affective steps that you can use. And when we use the word affective, meaning like in terms of emotional steps you can take. So building their self-esteem and self-worth, helping them see their value and build inner strength, tell them and show them you love them every day, tell others that you are proud of your child, especially in front of your child, remind them that they're worthy and important, stand up for them in front of others. Remind your child that they are safe with you, and match compliments to gender identity. So, if you have a child whose gender identity is female, you would say like, you look really pretty today, and not, you look handsome. So the family acceptance protects youth. So your young adults whose caregivers, parents, guardians, etc., who are supportive of their LGBTQ plus identity have better overall health, less mental health struggles, less depression, less suicide attempts and ideation, are less likely to use substances, and they are more confident that they can be successful, happy, and have a life to look forward to. So the potential for resiliency is significant. LGBTQ plus youth who report high levels of support have the same outcomes as their peers.
So with supporting a child with their gender identity, you want to use the child's pronouns. I say pronouns and not preferred pronouns, because again, when you make it like, oh, this is my preference, it's setting up to where it seems optional. So this is someone's pronouns.
Hey, Destiny, real quick, we have a question about a previous slide, if I can jump in.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Heather.
Sorry about that. My question is, in a given situation where a parent knows where their child is gay from whatever point or whatever their orientation is, in a situation where the child is coming out to the parent, but it's already known to the parent, is the question offensive to ask why they feel the need to label themselves?
So for the coming out, I would like to add that you do not know your child's, someone does not know their child's identity until it has come out. The child decides to come out. So you may have, someone may have some inclinations that they have a child that may be LGBTQ, but one does not officially know someone's sexual orientation or gender identity until the child decides to come out to them. So some parents in support may make comments like, oh, I've always known, which again is well intended. But it we don't know until a child decides to come out to us, because maybe they didn't know how they were. So it would be kind of saying we knew before they were, but they didn't know. And it is ultimately up to them, what label they are.
Okay.
In terms of asking that specific question around like why they feel the need to label themselves, that's a really vulnerable moment for someone when they come out to their family or come out to anyone. And that particular question can create it can cause that person's defenses to go up because they're trying to share something vulnerable with that person. And so when asked why they feel the need to label themselves, it can come across like rejection just based on how it's phrased, even if that's not the intent. So oftentimes that will be seen as an offensive response to the situation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, in that specific situation, it was further into the conversation as to why that individual felt the need to like make announcements like this is my orientation. And I guess I was more along questioning, I don't walk around saying I'm heterosexual. So, because it's just part of who I am, but it's not something I make an announcement to people. And that was where I was trying to, obviously it's a more personal thing for me. And that's where I was trying to go with it. And it was, like I said, it was much later in the conversation. So there had been other things that had been stated before, but it was just why they felt the need to identify and let people know, like, hey, this is who I am when you're just you.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to an earlier slide in the 101 where I was talking about heterosexism, which is just the assumption that everybody is just naturally straight, cisgender. So when those, assumptions about someone can really hurt, especially when they're not true. And I don't want people thinking that I'm straight because I'm not. It's labels are important. Those are how we view our identity and how we know ourselves. So if someone were to refer to me as straight, I would want to correct it and say, no, I'm not. I'm queer, I'm pansexual. So it's kind of the same way. You can kind of think of it also as if we were to use a different identity instead of sexual orientation, like race or disability status, people don't like it when someone assumes that they are a different race than who they are because that's part of their identity. Same thing about having a neurodiversity or a disability. It's something that is part of them and affects their lives every day. So it's something that they would want to clear up that misunderstanding because it's part of who they are. I think sometimes when we have a dominant identity that doesn't involve discrimination or harassment, sometimes, especially with me and race, I sometimes have a tendency to forget things or make certain assumptions about how everyone's universal experience is, because it's so easy for me being white sometimes that sometimes I may forget, like, oh, I need to check my privilege in this this situation, because I'm not thinking intersectionally and how a person of a non-dominant identity may actually be experiencing life different than me.
Yeah, I just wanted to add too, I think that as parents and caregivers, there's that natural inclination to protect your child and, want them to be okay and not want them to be in kind of a vulnerable position, and kind of, put them in a little bubble and keep them safe. And I think that, when they share their identity, that's not, in a mainstream, it does put them in a vulnerable position, and you worry about, how people are going to treat them, and are they going to be discriminated against? Are they going to be harmed? Are they going to be okay? And so I think having that like kind of, natural protective instinct is, really, part of being a parent or a caregiver and wanting to keep your kids safe. But also looking at it through kind of a different lens of like, maybe this is empowering for them, or like validating to be able to say, who they are, knowing that, that they had to overcome adversity to do it. And they might feel kind of a sense of, accomplishment or strength in being brave and doing so. So kind of allowing them to go through that.
In further context, I was in that situation, I was literally just talking about like sexually transmitted diseases and things like that when that individual came out to me and said, I'm gay. And I'm like, okay, you can still catch these things regardless of what you are. And then it, like I said, it was further into the conversation where I wanted to know like why they felt the need to put a label on themselves.
And
Yeah.
in that situation, it might have been that they felt safe telling you. And
Yeah,
it felt
because
good.
I don't put a label on myself, and I just see that individual as who they are, and I don't label them as anything.
So when you are so
I know it's a complex thing.
no, it is. So for you and I, we are part of the dominant and culturally accepted sexual sexual attraction. We're heterosexual. That's what is considered the norm. That is what our policies as a nation tend to have protected. Again, Amarine talked about how gay marriage wasn't legal until fairly recently. So there is no reason for us to feel like we have to identify or label ourselves, because we're part of what has been considered just what everyone should be, right? So when someone identifies differently than that, it creates a lot of pressure and stress on them, as Amarine was talking about with ACEs. A lot of the teams that I work with, it creates this internal stress when they can't share that information. And having that label, like Amarine said, is really empowering for them, because they're saying, I feel safe telling you. It can be very scary for individuals who identify with a diverse SOGI, and being able to be out and use that label with people, it allows them to feel like they can be a member of society the way that they are, regardless of what has been pushed upon most of us growing up. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just because that's a topic that individual and it was many years ago. And obviously we have a different, I mean, we have this amazing relationship, not different, but we have an amazing relationship, and it's been some years since that occurred. And I've asked that question of them more recently, like why, like we've discussed when they had come out and everything, and why they felt the need to label themselves, and they still don't, like, they can't provide, I guess, an insightful answer. And that's why I was questioning as to why any individual feels the need to label themselves. And I know that may sound like, I guess, immature or lacking some sort of insight, but just as to why people feel the need that they have to label themselves. You are who you are. It doesn't change who you are.
I think it's really great that you're asking the question. And I also think you should take it as a compliment that the person, felt safe having that conversation with you and coming out to you and knowing that, you were going to be okay and you were going to have a relationship with them and that you were, a safe person for them. I think that says a lot about you. And I think you should really recognize that as well. And think about how you might have been part of that child or that person. I guess they might not be a child, but how that person was able to feel validated, have their identity validated, using a label that they wanted to, finally feel valid or accepted. Even though, labels aren't something like, I don't go around and say, Paige is my straight friend and Destiny is my queer friend.
Right. That's where I was going with it is I didn't understand the need to put a label on ourselves because we are who we are. Like, that individual has preferred nicknames or names that she likes, and we utilize those. We have their entire life. And she's 25. So this was even before it was, before laws were passed and before it was common or anything like that. And that was my only question is it doesn't change who they are because they're just them.
But that's because of who you are. I think that speaks more to who you are than to who they are. And they might not have had that experience in society where people are, accepting and supportive. And so being able to use a label in a safe way might be kind of like a weight off their shoulders.
And it's an identity that folks in the community have pride with. So I tell people I am queer because I am proud of being queer. It's not something I feel, I'm blessed to feel pride and not experience that internalized shame or stigma about. It was a process for me that, I didn't realize this one day and felt pride. I went through the process of working through, shame and homophobia that I've experienced. And, after a journey of self-acceptance and self-exploration, it's, where I am now after a long and difficult journey of living in such a way where I have experienced homophobia and discrimination, to be able to proudly say that I am queer and know that I am safe in those areas that I am saying it in, because it reminds me of the journey that I've had. And, being able to say I am part of a community that is meaningful to me. I need that label so I can say I am a part of that community, so I can have access to that community. And when you give yourself, labels, sometimes that's how we get access to resources, privileges, and benefits, by identifying within that community. And that's how we get access to those communities, resources, and supports.
I think especially when that community has been oppressed too, so to have an oppressive history and then to be able to reclaim that title and say, who you are and use a label, it can be kind of, freeing and empowering.
10 years ago, I couldn't, openly go in any group of people and say, I am queer. It's something after a long and difficult journey I am now able to do. And I am proud of going through that journey and being where I am in my life now.
Yeah, and I will say a lot, the historical background of people who identify with SOGI is one filled with people trying to remove them from this planet. I know that sounds drastic, but that is the case. The reading list,
the numbers support that page, so it's it sounds dramatic, but it's true, right?
Yeah. So if you look at the reading list that I provided in the chat that will get emailed out, the nonfiction section has reading on a lot of different historical events like Stonewall, if we think of, you know, our war with the Nazis that we had, we think of it as like against Jews, but there are also people who identified within the queer community were forced to wear a pink triangle, and they were tested upon, and they were also put in camps
and sterilized against their will so they couldn't reproduce.
So being a part of a community that so many different people have tried to eradicate it, and being able to say, I am this person and stand with pride with that, has a little bit extra to it when that's been the history, if that makes sense.
No, that does. My only question is because this individual was a child and was unaware of, at the time they were a child, and was unaware of, you know, the stigmas or all the negative things that had occurred and that still occur, but at the time they were unaware of it, why they felt the need to label themselves as anything.
I will tell you, as someone that works in schools, the stigma and the negative connotations that come with it, they start experiencing that at a very young age. So while it may seem like they might not know, they probably knew to some extent. Maybe not the full history, but I would say that more than likely they knew a lot of it.
And also when you look at children and where they are developmentally, they're at that age range where identity is something that is so salient and important to who they are. That is the phase where it's, I think, like identity versus exploration, if we're looking at Erickson. But you know, that is developmentally an age where identities and labels and understanding who they are in the world is so important to them.
Okay. So is it considered offensive to ask why they felt the need to label themselves?
I think it might also be how the intent, you know, the phrasing and the intention. If someone is coming to me with the question where they have genuine curiosity, where, you know, knowledge to know to do better, I'm more open to answering those conversations and, you know, having discussions with it. But because of my safety and me not wanting to experience homophobia or discrimination, if I am perceiving that the person is approaching me with a question that seems kind of like I'm being challenged, I'm being put on the spot, my response is going to be a little bit different depending on the approach and the perceived intention of that person.
I think it's all about the relationship too. You know, if you have if you and I have a relationship where, you know, we're really open with each other and we feel safe and you're asking questions, I might see that as, you know, genuine curiosity and wanting to understand me better. So, I mean, giving each other grace too, like maybe I didn't like how you phrased it or something like that, but just giving each other grace, like, you know, I'm going to let you ask these questions, even if they might come off, you know, wrong. You know, giving somebody that space to still be curious and, you know, have better understanding.
Okay, it's just something that has stuck with me, and I was just genuinely curious about, and I understand the whole thing about stereotypes and everything like that, but just genuinely curious as to why the need was there to label ourselves as anything.
So I hope that conversation did help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much.
Of course.
And thank you for asking and caring. Yeah, we appreciate that a lot.
So to finish off this slide, we were talking about other ways to support child with gender identity. I said using pronouns, seeking gender affirming care, while also finding a doctor that affirms gender, and finding supportive clothing that helps them express their gender identity. When it comes to pronouns, I just kind of want to give that little caveat that remember that language is part of our culture. It is always evolving. So some folks may use these weird grammar rules as a justification for not using pronouns. This is a tool of oppression that called invalidation, especially since, you know, Merriam-Webster, a group that functions as an authority for English grammar and language, has recognized they as a valid singular pronoun. Okay, so next slide.
And if you have questions about pronouns, I believe this one's on our reading list that I sent out, but what's your pronoun? This book, I've read most of it. It's really great. This one is by Dennis Barron. I'll put the title in the chat. It goes through the historical context and how how the grammatical piece of pronouns has been used as a tool of oppression, and it looks different cultures.
When we think about gender affirming care, this is a protective factor to trauma. Puberty tends to begin around 10 to 11, though puberty can start earlier. So this physical change of puberty can cause distress for many transgender and gender nonconforming adolescents. So we kind of talked about gender dysphoria earlier, but this dysphoria starts in childhood and it worsens with the start of puberty, and it rarely goes away without intervention. So I kind of want everyone to imagine how traumatic it must be to watch your body undergo changes that you absolutely do not want them to happen, and feeling powerless during this process. So puberty can cause permanent changes to your face and body that, even with expensive surgeries as an adult, have the option to correct. There are some things that may permanently alter your appearance, even if you if you can afford those expensive surgeries. So even when trans kids are able to transition years later, they still may experience dysphoria over qualities about their body due to the changes that puberty caused. So the process of transitioning varies per person, but just, seek a gender affirming doctor, get information to get informed consent, and those choices between you and your doctor are between you and your doctor after having a conversation about what the options are, pros and cons. That choice is between you and your doctor. So puberty blockers are a way that we can suppress puberty temporarily. This helps gives children and family the time to think about or plan for future psychological, medical, social, or legal needs. If they decide to stop taking puberty blockers, puberty will resume and the normal progression of puberty will continue. There are some studies say there are long-term effects, some refute this. So that's why it's important to find a doctor that affirms gender in order for you to be aware of all possible choices. Hormone replacement therapy, we did talk about earlier, but typically when puberty blocking starts, we also tend to replace it with the preferred hormone that helps us have a body, voice, and appearance that align with the gender that we want to present as. Doctors may wait till 18, but some recommended earlier, 16 or even earlier. Typically, how we were talking about teachers not providing that gender affirming curriculum, same thing with doctors, not necessarily due to safety concerns or health concerns. May they not provide gender affirming care? It's typically because they don't want to get sued or lose their license because of some state law. So doctors may be hesitant because of legal issues instead of health issues. Hormones appear to be safe in studies that have been published. And then, just the one last thing on that slide is some folks make that argument that what if they changed their mind, or what if they went through a transition that they eventually decided they didn't want to do. The studies that have been shown, folks who typically decide to detransition typically don't regret going through transition because it helped them further explore their gender identity. So studies, arguments that say that puberty blocking and things at an early age can be damaging for child, studies actually kind of refute that, and it tends to be more beneficial a lot more than harmful. And then also, you don't need to medically transition to be transgender. You're transgender regardless of what body parts you have. But some folks may decide to medically transition because it helps them feel better about themselves. Gender affirming care is life-saving health care. We were talking about developmentally, at that age of 2 or 3, or, when we want to assert our identity when we're teenagers. we want to use that affirming language. And the modalities of gender affirmation look very similar to ways that folks can transition when they're transgender. There's legal ways to transition, including birth certificate, social security card, driver's license. So supporting someone that way, using someone's pronoun, calling them by their name that they request, assisting with medical needs, including surgical needs. So these are ways that transgender folks may decide to transition, and we would want to support that and affirm it. So take home points: gender affirming care is healthcare. It's important to be trauma informed when providing care to trans folks, and kids who are safe and loved at home do well.
And I just want to put this one point that when it comes to transitioning, it is not an immediate process. There are psychologists, medical professionals. There are a lot of different professionals that people have to go through before this transition happens. So I think there's this misconception that as soon as someone wants to go through a medical and surgical transition, that it's just going to happen. They're going to see a doctor and like all of a sudden, cool, we're going to schedule you, we're good to go. No, there are all kinds of assessments. Like I said, there's psychologists and therapists that will do an assessment to make sure that it is within the best interest for the mental health of the person who is interested in going through that transition. You're muted, Amreen.
Thank you. We talked a little bit earlier about coming out, and ways to be supportive when your child or someone that comes out. So there's a lot of research that has shown that family acceptance of adolescents and young adults can promote well-being and decreases the risk of suicide, depression, substance abuse. I know we've mentioned that a few times, but it's just to kind of reiterate, how much impact you can have by being supportive on a child or on a person's well-being. So when your child or someone comes out to you, it's a big step for them. It's often filled with fear, anxiety about your reaction, worried if they're still lovable, and you need to believe your child and make this known to them. It's easy to assume cliches or denial by saying things like it's just a phase, or they're confused, especially if your kid is young. However, saying some of these things can sometimes impact your relationship. So if those are your first thoughts, that's okay, and you can work through them with time, but in the meantime, your child still needs to see that you believe them and you love them, no matter what, and not in spite of their sexuality or gender identity, but including it. So some things you can do to support the coming out process, and remember that coming out can be scary, is understand that your child might not want to come out to everyone at once. Paige and Destiny talked about this earlier, that sometimes they might feel safe in some situations and not others. Realize that your child might feel like they're risking their physical and emotional safety. So letting them know that you are a safe person and they're safe with you can help make them feel more comfortable. Be prepared to give them time to have your questions answered. It was like Heather was talking about earlier, you might want to know more information, and that's okay to have that curiosity. So, allowing for time and knowing that this could be overwhelming for your child, and be prepared to give some time to have those questions answered. But also, knowing that curiosity and interest and desire for understanding, is appreciated. And remind your child that you love them unconditionally. Their identity does not change your connection to them. Listen to them and let them know you're open to being told how you can support them. It's okay if it's difficult, and be patient. The Trevor Project has a really good coming out handbook. If anyone wants to refer to that, that's a lot more detailed, and give some really good ideas and specific strategies you can use to be supportive. So other things you can do to support your child is introducing them to diverse media with good representation. Watching a movie with them that might have LGBTQ characters, or, actors or actresses, and being able to say like, oh, I really like Elliot Page, he's a good actor. Creating an open, respectful environment within the home, encouraging your child to express themselves and be comfortable in their skin is the utmost importance. So you can do this by, not policing their gender or expression through stereotypes. So letting them play with all types of toys and dress and express themselves in different ways. This was just a quote by a parent who said, my husband and I always tried to make sure Alpha knew that there are not girl things or boy things. Boys can play with dolls, girls can play with cars, colors are fine for everyone. So doing this can help your child feel comfortable when they come to you with questions or thoughts about their identity. Encourage them to make friends in the LGBTQIA community. Ways that you can do this is apps or support groups. Sometimes depending on where you live, there might not be, a big or a known community. So, looking into support groups or even online groups might be a place for them to find some sort of sense of community. So there's also, just because a kid is or a person is LGBTQ plus does not necessarily mean that they need therapy, but they might, and if they do, finding a therapist who is SOGI informed and, LGBTQ plus safe is important. A child can easily get overwhelmed with dealing something as big as naming or settling into their identity. So, having that support for them can be helpful, especially by, a professional who is informed about those topics. It also might be helpful as a parent or caregiver to expand your friend circle with other, parents or families that have LGBTQ family members or children. And there are parent support groups at Affirmations, and they are virtual. If you ever wanted to, you can drop into those if you're interested. You could do that as well. Sometimes as a parent, it's just nice to talk to other, caregivers too, who might, know where you're coming from or have experienced some of the same reactions or fears or concerns, about what it's like to have a kid who, is in a group who has, historical oppression. So this is a pretty long list. But there are tips for allies for harm reduction. A lot of this is repetitive. So I don't want to go too fast. And actually I'll let Destiny kind of talk about some of these. Go ahead, Destiny.
I always refer to ally as a title because a title is earned rather than someone saying this is how I identify, that anyone can claim. So allyship is a title that you earn. So listening with so a lot of this also has to do with our agreements we talked about earlier. Listen with an open mind, be aware of different identities and the struggles that they face. Learning is lifelong and ever evolving, and be willing to adjust your thinking when being presented with new information, being intentional about including others, treating everyone with dignity and respect, understand everyone's a teacher or learner, never make assumptions about someone's SOGI status, always ask, normalize the process of sharing pronouns, don't out people, call the person by the name and pronoun that they identify of using, speak out when someone says something harmful, understand that if you have privilege in that situation, your words may be taken more seriously and you have greater impact when you speak out. This doesn't have to be a big speech, just a statement about, hey, that's not cool, that's making me uncomfortable. That, even that alone can be helpful in that situation. Prioritize an individual's safety over anyone's comfort. So also practice being uncomfortable. So if there's something you're not familiar with that you want to learn more about, practice asking those questions so you can help deepen your understanding, and support policies that support our complete inclusion and acceptance in society. So especially today, we are seeing a lot of bills being pushed to suppress our identity, which is why having pride is so important, because even now in 2023, even though gay marriage has been the law of the land for quite, 8+ years, it's still, we still face struggle. So that's why I have pride with who I am. And there's a cute little acronym for ally if that helps find, center the impacted, learn from those who live in that oppression, leverage your privilege in situations where you can make a difference, and yield the floor or yield the labor. So let people who are oppressed speak for themselves in situations that it's appropriate to. And then here's the gender unicorn. Basically, this kind of just states that gender identity, gender expression, those can exist on a continuum from, identifying with some femininity or none. Same thing for gender expression. Sex assigned at birth, there's 3 because intersex is in there, and physical attraction and emotional attraction are different. Someone can be physically attracted to a gender but not emotionally, and vice versa. Also just remembering that, especially for folks who identify as like bisexual, pansexual, omnisexual, the person's romantic partner does not dictate their orientation. So if a person's bisexual, and they are dating someone of the opposite sex, that doesn't mean they choose an orientation. That just happens to be the partner that they are dating now. And again, it's up to the person to decide what labels they use.
And Heather's question, oh, you're muted, Maureen.
Sorry, I was just going to say the same thing you do. I wanted to address the question in the chat. And I would like for Destiny to address this as well, but I think that generally allies are welcomed and should go to Pride just to expand, the level of support, but also to remember that Pride isn't for you. Pride is for, it's Pride in the LGBTQ plus community, and you are there as a supporter. But I think, if everybody went to Pride, it would be, a safer, more inclusive world. But Destiny, if you wanted to answer that as well.
Yeah, ditto, but then just adding that that Y in ally, yield the floor. So if a person who is cisgender, heterosexual is at Pride and they are an ally, I am totally okay with that, but I don't want them to be the main speaker at the event talking about Pride when they are not a member. So giving time and space for folks who are in that identity to be able to talk about their experiences, their struggles, and their needs, and not speaking for them, but speaking with them or on behalf of them, with them in the forefront. And then here's just some of the many Pride flags. That top right one tends to be the one that a lot of us use or show right now because it encompasses sexual orientation, intersex identity, trans identity in the brown and black. Bars also talk about how this affects persons of color, but different identities also have different flags. Some may just choose to use this flag. Some may have a flag that specifically represents their identity that they may like to use too. It just all depends on the person. Oh, and then the takeaway, caregivers are the most important factor in the safety and outcomes for LGBTQ plus youth. You have the ability to make a difference.
Oh, will you go back to the hotline numbers and leave it up there? We will do questions, but that way those are up. I put a couple of the resources in the chat that Maureen mentioned, and then I've also started a draft email to send to Anita that she can send out after with all the other resources.
Anybody have any questions? Please feel free, as Heather has done, which we very much appreciate. Come forward and ask questions, or if you are a little shy about the questions. The emails for the wonderful speakers will be available so that you can contact them and ask them the questions at hand. Well, ladies, this was really wonderful. Great information. I learned a lot myself. And I do so appreciate the presentations today and your time, but also the fact that this is one of the uncomfortable norms for some of the 70s and 80-year-old people that are raising little people. So we also need to be kind to their feelings and emotions as well. And I appreciate the fact that you've done that and made them feel comfortable. So with that being said, we appreciate your time and have a wonderful day and try to enjoy the weekend. Be safe, be happy, love yourself. That's all we ask.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you, everyone.